There never was a blacker Christmas for the civilized world than the Christmas of 1941. Millions of people had lost their homes, their families, their countries. And millions more had lost their lives. Four-fifths of all the people in the world were involved in the greatest struggle in history. In Europe, Germany had occupied Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, made satellites of Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Finland, poured her troops into Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Yugoslavia, Greece, and 50,000 square miles of Russian territory. Fascist Italy had seized Albania and Ethiopia in Africa. And even before these nations were overrun, Japan had occupied Formosa, Korea, and part of China. French Indochina, with the consent of the Vichy regime, had become a Japanese base. In violation of her treaties, Japan had fortified the Marshall, Caroline, and the Mariana Islands. Cordell Hull, American Secretary of State, had used every means at his disposal to check Japanese aggression. In November 1941, Americans hoped that his efforts were meeting with success when the Japanese sent Saburo Kurusu, a special envoy, by plane to Washington. But Kurusu's trip was only a smokescreen. Even while the negotiations were in progress, Japanese aircraft carriers loaded with planes had started out for this. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. It was the logical target, this great naval base in the Hawaiian Islands, 2,500 miles from California, 3,000 miles from Japan. The sneak attack succeeded in sinking or damaging 19 American ships, destroying 150 planes and killing 3,077 men. By crippling this naval base, Japan became temporarily master of the Pacific. And Germany and Fascist Italy declared war on the United States. Here in the White House in Washington on the second day of January 1942, President Roosevelt and the representatives of 26 nations signed a pact of mutual aid against the aggressors. The pact reads, each government pledges itself to employ its full resources, military or economic, against those members of the Tripartite Pact and its adherents with which such government is at war. Each government pledges itself to cooperate with the government signatory hereto, and not to make a separate armistice or peace with the enemies. But it was a long time before the power of these United Nations could be felt. England, the last fortress of resistance in the West, lay only a few miles from Nazi-dominated Europe. The cities were under constant bombardment by the Germans. Russia, bearing the brunt of the vast German attack, had had to evacuate all of her great industries and rebuild them hundreds of miles from the war fronts. The people of China had been forced to carry whole factories back out of range of the Japanese advance. Only America, free from bombing and invasion, was able to produce to her full capacity. But her factories were not yet equipped for war. An industrial miracle had to be performed. Factories had to be rebuilt, retooled. The machines of peace removed. Those of war built and installed. Men who had made automobiles learned to make tanks and planes. Men who had repaired watches now made precision flight instruments. Women who had been housewives learned strange new skills. A peacetime army of 800,000 had to be built up to an army of millions. Men who had been farmers, fishermen, clerks, factory workers, bookkeepers, had to learn to fight. At first, they had to drill with wooden guns and trucks for tanks. The people of the United States, like others, had learned in a bitter lesson. They could not remain isolated from the rest of the world. They were drilling and preparing, learning to carry their share of the burden. And the armies of the United Nations were growing. The Americans, the British and men from the great British dominions, Russians, Chinese, Czechs, Greeks, men from India, free Norwegians who had escaped from Nazi-dominated Europe, Yugoslavs, Dutch, Javanese, Poles, Danes, Luxembourgers, and Belgians, Filipinos, and free Frenchmen rallying to the fight under the standard of General de Gaulle. Great oceans separated the Allied powers. The shipping lanes were the lifelines of the United Nations. With the British and the American navies spread thin over the 5 oceans, the German U-boats became bolder. This was the Battle of the Atlantic in 1942. In 10 months, the Allies lost over 500 ships. With each of these sinkings went down tons of desperately needed supplies for the fighting fronts in Russia, England, and Africa.